Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. In this episode, we are talking to Colin Bogar, CEO and Head of Product Development at PropertyFastBook, in the second week of our 2 weeks deep dive into China's fascinating housing market. Colin spent 3 years at Colliers in Shanghai, and we talk about his time there during the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 and ask his opinion on why China's housing market slowed starting in 2011. We ask him about how the market has changed in the last 5 years, key trends he's seeing, and where he believes the market is going. We also dive into his own company that he started several years ago, PropertyFastBook, and whether the pandemic has impacted his business and how. Enjoy.
The best comparison to where I think China is going to go is likely Japan. And I don't know if it's 5 to 10 years, but so what happened in Japan when its economy crashed in the early 90s? Japan already had bad demographics, which China is very quickly going to have. And so population growth is going to slow. You'll still see some urbanization, but the replacement, the birth rate is well below replacement now. And China, it's very unlikely that China will be a country that people immigrate to in any major number.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Colin, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Tell us your China story. Everybody's got something interesting to say about how they ended up in China. How did you end up in Shanghai? And as a Canadian, where did your interest in China begin?
China was honestly never on my radar in life. Like a lot of people end up here, it's kind of one experience. When I was doing my master's degree, there was a 4-credit project/trip to China, which I joined at the last minute because someone canceled 2 days before it was going to leave. We were in China for 2 weeks. This was 2007. I was expecting a much more developing country. We on that trip, we went to Beijing, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong. It was a lot more developed than I thought it would be. And I could kind of see, I could see a life journey there. I thought that, there was a number of things even at that time that, to be honest, didn't make sense as an outside observer or things that were obviously going to improve. And I thought, I didn't move obviously instantly. I finished my master's degree and I was thinking about other options, but it kind of became a life option at that point.
What year did you go to China for the first time?
So that was 2007. So I was doing my MBA at the Ivy Business School, and then I moved out 2008 right before the Olympics. So I went to Beijing first, and I studied Chinese for a month and a half at Beijing Cultural and Language University, BCLU, and started looking for a job. And then I got a job at Colliers in Shanghai. That's where I wanted to live, even though I'd never been to Shanghai. I kind of, from my research, that seemed like the best option. And found a job and started the journey.
You said that you were at Colliers in Shanghai from 2008, and you were there, I think, until about 2011. Tell us a little bit about what you saw in the real estate market. I mean, tell us about being in the real estate market back then. Because I remember when I first went to China, I thought, I need to be in the crane business. This is incredible. Like, I've never seen more cranes in my life. And I still think that today, like 50% of the world's elevators are being installed in China. Tell us what you were seeing in real estate during that time, both commercial and residential. How did that fit in with the other dynamic trends happening in China at that time, a la technology and others?
It was interesting. I mean, on the residential side, things always seemed expensive based on kind of on the yield that owners would get for rent. So rent at that time actually seemed quite reasonable in 2008. I mean, the financial crisis had happened, but prices never really ever went down. Like people who owned an apartment or a condo in Shanghai, I mean, they were getting like 1%, 1.5% gross yields then. And, those numbers have kind of stuck as prices have gone up, rents have gone up with them now, but it's still really low. So residential was always confusing to foreigners. Shows what we know. Because I know a lot of foreigners we're always waiting for a price correction in Shanghai. These are kind of more longer term residents that just never happened. And then on the commercial side, that's when commercial real estate kind of really started to develop beyond kind of the multinationals. So the big thing in 2008 was malls actually. There obviously were some decent malls, but the explosion in kind of Chinese consumer spending was about to happen, and online retail had not happened yet. So that was the sector that everybody was betting on, and so even to this day, I know I live in the suburbs of Shanghai, and the second biggest mall in the city just opened up beside my house. And building a mall is complicated, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of major malls built, in the next 5 to 10 years. But we're still kind of seeing the derivatives or the after effects of all that planning that started kind of in 2008, 2010, 2012, when that was kind of the asset class that people were most excited about.
In the 3 years that you were at Colliers, the world was in the midst of that huge financial crisis in 2008. What did you see in China? How did they react? How did consumers or purchasers potentially react? Were there real estate investors that potentially were impacted, or did they react or retract from the market? What about developers? Can you just kind of lay out maybe a little bit about what you remember the impact of the global economic crisis of 2008 having on that sector?
Sure. So China, when it first happened, when Lehman Brothers, went bankrupt and the crisis officially started, although it was kind of brewing, I think, in the kind of 8 to 12 months before then, with Bear Stearns going under. But actually, one of the reasons I went to China is I didn't expect a financial crisis per se, but I was concerned about the direction of the economy in North America, given that Bear Stearns had already gone under in I think March of that year. But so anyway, so October 1st around then is when Lehman went under. There was everybody was nervous in China. Companies were all cutting costs, cutting headcount, and the Chinese government started spending money, and through that stimulus, I think really that economy bounced back fairly quickly, kind of within 3 to 6 months. I think after about 6 months, people were no longer nervous, although there was still kind of let's call it a 3 to 6 month window when people were wondering if they were going to have a job. And I think in North America, that was more of a kind of a 2-year process. So it recovered a lot quicker there, I remember. Now, when it comes to real estate, I mean, that's one of the ways China has famously stimulated their economy, real estate and infrastructure spending. And 2008 was kind of the moment in the real estate market here where the investors switched from a large part of it being foreign capital to being domestic capital. So money from state-owned enterprises, SOEs, institutional investors here. And a lot of the dynamic in the market really turned local at that point. So not a great time as a foreigner to be coming into that industry. I mean, there's still obviously lots of foreign capital. There still is lots of foreign capital, but that was kind of the moment where domestic capital became more important as far as who the likely new buyers or investors in commercial real estate was going to be.
I mean, it's pretty well documented. I don't remember. I wasn't in real estate, but I know and I've read that the real estate market really in China, the tremendous growth period was kind of the 2005 to the 2011 area, right? But what is it about 2011? What happened? What was going on? Like, there was no macroeconomic event that I can remember from 2011 other than,
the Canada won the gold medal in at the Olympics for hockey in 2010. Maybe that had some serious global effects. I don't know. But what happened in 2011 that just saw this growth slow in the real estate sector in China? Can you point to anything?
Yeah. So on the commercial side, because I'm currently working on a project with a financial services company, and it's related to office space. And we were looking back at the trend of office space costs over the last 10 years, starting about 2010. And office space is almost the same price as it was in 2010. So it was either really expensive in 2010, or the new supply that's come onto the market has kind of stagnated any price growth. So on the commercial side, that's kind of the flip side to all the spending on real estate and infrastructure, is that there is generally an oversupply of commercial real estate space across the country, including in Shanghai. Or the supply is meeting the demand exactly. You could look at it more optimistically like that. On the residential side, when people think about real estate price growth, they're primarily thinking about residential. I mean, residential started at such a low price point, and in many ways, I think it correlated a lot with the growth in income in China. I mean, it wasn't uncommon, in the 2000s for wages to go up 10% a year, although it's starting at a very low base. People used to, now it's not common at all, but at that time it was kind of expected that at Chinese New Year, people would get a salary raise, between 5 to 8%, even kind of around 2011. So I think a lot of the residential price mirrored that growth in just wage gains. And then the increase in credit has also had a big part of that, where it was easier for people to get mortgages. But around 2011 is also when the Chinese government started realizing this is a little bit of a problem. Houses are getting pretty expensive, and there's probably a lot of money going into real estate here that isn't for living. And Xi Jinping today in China, talks about trying to make real estate more for living as opposed as an investment vehicle. But that was the other thing that happened in 2011. The government really started restricting people buying second houses and other things. And so prices still went up since then, but certainly at a lower pace.
Mm-hmm. So broadly speaking, maybe over the 12 or so years, 13 years that you've been in China, can you just kind of talk about some of the changes that you've seen in the real estate market there? And I'd really like to tease out some differentiation from you. If you can kind of map out first tier and second tier cities versus lower tiered cities when it comes to how things have kind of grown, developed, and changed and morphed along the way.
Sure. So I mean, the big thing when it comes to, I guess, real estate in general in China, and this used to be in the presentations I used to give, it's talking about the urbanization story there. And urbanization in China is, I think, different than in, for example, in Western countries. The countryside in China is generally not a nice place. There's generally not infrastructure. And so nobody really wants to live there. They want to move to cities where there's normal schools and public transportation and employment opportunities. So I think that rate has gone from 50% to 65% today. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's certainly still well below most developed countries. So you still have a lot of people in China who are living in the countryside. And so having said that, you get to talking about the difference between kind of the first tier cities and the second tier cities. Anecdotally, you've Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, in my opinion, are kind of the main first tier cities, with Shenzhen being the city that I think grew the most and improved the most over that time. I know I've been to Shenzhen. I was there in 2007 and I was there last year. It blew my mind at how much that place has improved, to the point where I really think that's easily the second city of China ahead of Beijing. Beijing is still, in my opinion, not that nice of a place to live. unless you're kind of young and single and living kind of in the cool urban core. It's not a place you'd want to live in the suburbs. And Shenzhen has nicer weather as well. So you kind of have those three first-tier cities. Some of the second-tier cities have developed more than others, but a lot of them, honestly, to me, they look exactly the same when I go there now, with the exception being Shenzhen. Part of that is because I think a lot of the development was restricted for whatever reason in the city center. In China's kind of urban planning system, they wanted to avoid overcrowding, and so the cities are already fairly dense, but they really encourage these new town developments, buildings in these massive places in the suburbs, which sometimes looks like overcapacity, but in certainly in the second and third tier cities, they fill up eventually. The other things that really I've noticed is quality improvement. So in residential housing, even just rental residential housing, in 2008, 2010, and Todd, you probably can speak to this, it was hard to find anything that looked reasonable on the inside. Really challenging. The furniture was awful. The kitchen cabinets were all often multicolored, turquoise or orange. Just bizarre would be the word I would use to describe it. And, somewhere in the last kind of 3 to 5 years, you go into Airbnb and you go to Shanghai, everything looks exactly like it does in Western countries. It's like things are just nicer, and it's not for the foreigners, it's for the domestic population. People have higher expectations. They've traveled abroad. They know what good design is and whatnot. And so that's carried on into real estate as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the financing side. I know that you mentioned, what the Lehman Brothers and whatnot, what was going on that drove, because we talked about that kind of macroeconomic event of 2008. And a lot of that was kind of like a mortgage and lending driven, around, property. What would you say retail real estate investors in China typically, how do they approach it? Do they take on debt, that the way they have, or the way that people still do in other countries? Or how are they kind of debt and servicing this investment? How does that financial, mechanism work in China?
Yeah. So for a long time, property prices were significantly lower. And there was kind of just that pent up savings here. So I'll talk about kind of 10 years ago, and I'll talk about today. 10 years ago, prices were growing at such a rate, and you have to realize there's always rules on how easy it was to buy a property in Shanghai. For example, you had to be a Shanghai resident, or you had to be have your Shanghai hukou, which is your residency certificate if you weren't from Shanghai. And so even if you lived in Beijing, you weren't allowed to buy a property in Shanghai. And so a lot of people kind of who were able to buy legally kind of felt it was a one-way street, because the real demand was quite a lot higher. So, the debt levels, banks felt comfortable lending, and, with their wage growth, it was not that dissimilar from Western countries. Today, though, when I look at the market and I look at the mortgages people are getting on, and this is once again anecdotally, but I talk to kind of people around, I'm 37. I talk to people around my age about the mortgages they're getting here, and for the kind of the quality of the property and where it's located and what they earn. And generally speaking, people earn less here than they do in Western countries, and the properties are more expensive. If you're kind of, let's call it a white collar worker, I would be concerned about taking on one of those mortgages myself, given the fact that wages are not increasing the way they once were. And I don't know if property can property might go up a little bit, but it's certainly not the same dynamics as it was 10 years ago.
What are some of the key trends that you're seeing in real estate in China right now? For instance, are we seeing a move to solar? Are we seeing a move to be more green? What are you seeing both on commercial and residential side of things?
Yeah, so when it comes to the environment, there's actually a Canadian guy here named Rafer Wallace. He has I don't know if a startup's the right word, but certainly a new business. He's an architect. He's got a company here that does it's less green Todd, it's more around health. So, because China, I think, really had and still has serious pollution issues, maybe not so much in Shanghai as it used to, but, if you go to Beijing, Beijing still has serious pollution issues. I think that's really the concern. And the thing is with a lot of this stuff, taking care of people's health often is good for the environment as well. And so the concern there is around that, air quality more so than kind of global warming. With coronavirus, I think that's only kind of become more prevalent, and the risk of viruses on kind of large building owners. In China, because coronavirus is essentially under control, that's not affecting things. But in the rest of the world right now, if you own a high-rise building of any sort, that's a massive losing proposition. People are nervous about getting in elevators. People are nervous about the circulating air. And so in many ways, China was kind of ahead of that curve in that they were more concerned about health than green. There is a green building standard here. Like a lot of things, Western countries, I don't think have gotten all of this right. People want to be green and they want to do the right things for global warming, but I think sometimes the solutions are not the most practical. True. I think what we're seeing in China around electric cars is, I think, a much more practical strategy. And that's like I think there's much bigger incentives here to having electric cars, certainly in Shanghai, than there is in most Western countries. The one thing I would criticize that I haven't seen change in China much is, they don't. A lot of China isn't that cold. South of the Yangtze River, they don't have central heating. So lots of apartments, and you'll speak to this, they don't have central heating, and they're not really insulated very well. So that kind of seems, I don't know the exact statistics on that, but that seems not the most environmentally friendly thing. So I would hope in the future they take some steps to improve that.
You mentioned an interesting point. I think for a lot of people who don't live there, the Yangtze or the Yellow River, as they call it, when they installed everything north of the Yangtze has almost city or provincial heating. So they have they just run radiant pipes throughout all the buildings, and then come, what is it, like November 15th to kind of like April 15th, there's that 6-month window where they fire up the big coal fire, boiler factories and the steam factories, and they just pump boiling hot water throughout every building, throughout all the towns that are hooked up to it, and it just generally heats all of the buildings. You don't have control. You don't have a thermostat. You can't turn it up. You can't turn it down. You can open a window if it's too hot. You can close the window if you want it to be too warm. But then everything below the Yangtze River has none of this. So then that's when you get your air conditioners that can blow hot or cold. That's correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And so Shanghai being, right south of the Yangtze River is in that zone where you still need heating for, probably 3 to 4 months. I can only imagine that there must be a better way of doing this.
Yes. And, for those of us who have lived both in the north and the south, and then Shanghai is unfortunately caught in a bit of that middle. And I love Shanghai. It's my favorite city to live in by far in China, for a lot of different reasons, mostly professional, I would say. But it was a really uncomfortable place weather-wise and temperature-wise to live because it gets super hot and muggy in the summer. So you're living in heavily air-conditioned buildings and apartments, and sometimes that air conditioning blowing in you all the time. We all walking around with sniffles in the summer because of air conditioning blowing on us all the time. And then in the winter, because the bones of our buildings were not heated, we had to blow in warm air all the time. So we were kind of a little bit uncomfortable having to constantly blow hot air into a room without the bones of the room being warm, and we end up being a little bit kind of like dealing with some sickness and always having to bundle up. It just seemed kind of uncomfortable at both ends of the spectrum.
It seems bizarre. And so the place where I live now, Todd, I have floor heating, which is essentially radiant heating.
Yes.
And it's actually, it's great. But the funny thing is, so like this came included in the building where I live. And so it costs a little bit of money, but honestly, it's the same price as the electricity on the air conditioners. Yet I talk to my neighbors and none of them turn it on.
Oh,
right.
Really?
it's because they have this, I don't know, there's a perception that it's expensive or whatever.
I'm sure.
And so, like, it's like, there's these things about China that will always be a mystery.
Yeah, that is certainly a little bit cultural. Where do you see the real estate industry in China developing in the next 5 to 10 years? And it's a bit of a leading question, honestly, because, I'm directly looking at the perceived housing bubble. Is there a bubble? What's going on? The way that China has developed and built their housing industry, is it sustainable? How is this? It's not, I don't know if it's going to burst or they're going to be able to take it down and slow it down and kind of de-escalate brick by brick so that it's a comfortable kind of remediation of the heat, and there's a lot that goes into how it got there, having to do with where do you put money? Are you trying to keep it away from the government's eyes? There's a lack of a stock market and other places to put your money. Can you kind of lay out a little bit and unpack that horrible description of that I just gave that is very complicated? Can you kind of unpack that a little bit for our audience and then maybe kind of tell us where you think things are going to kind of go in the next 5-10 years?
The best comparison to where I think China is going to go is likely Japan. And I don't know if it's 5 to 10 years, but so what happened in Japan when its economy crashed in the early 90s? Japan already had bad demographics, which China is very quickly going to have. And so population growth is going to slow. You'll still see some urbanization, but, the replacement, the birth rate is well below replacement now. And China, it's very unlikely that China will be a country that people immigrate to in any major number. So what I think is going to happen is, and it's already sort of happening, much like how Tokyo actually continues to grow and real estate in Tokyo after that initial kind of shock in 1990 has actually kind of grown slowly with inflation, where the rest of Japan has not, including kind of the second tier cities in Japan. I think you'll see something similar in China in kind of the next 5 to 10 years. A city like Shanghai and Shenzhen, probably Hangzhou would be the three that I would probably feel most confident about. But a lot of those other second tier cities that still have a ton of new construction happening and adding a ton of new housing. And, people are still moving from, the countryside close to those cities to those cities. It's hard to see how you would see price appreciation in that property, given the fact that there's just not going to be any population growth. And so I think the example we saw in Japan is going to probably play out exactly the same in China, with those three cities and maybe a couple others being okay, while the rest kind of stagnate, which is going to be a problem for people who take out these huge mortgages and have to deal with them. Has
COVID started to impact development, search items when people go into, I know like in Canada here we have realtor.ca. I know down south you've got Zillow who bought Trulia and things like the search terms, the search items, the demand for like a 3-bed 2-bath whatever. Is that changing? Are people now demanding office, need 2 home offices because everybody's on a Zoom and can't share an office at home? Has COVID impacted or changed things? Because I'm guessing, as I've seen a lot of change, I'm going to be very interested to see the data that comes out from Q3, Q4 as we go into next year, and that lag, that lead time that the world is catching up to the new normal. And I know people hate that term, but what was semi-permanent is becoming permanent. And now companies are saying, you know what, don't even bother coming back. Just stay working from home. And this is just much easier for everybody. So that starts to change the lifestyle. Lifestyle changes start to change how we look and how we want to live and where we live and in what we live and the way that it functions. Have you seen any of that being impacted over in China? Because some of what I'm hearing is that things are kind of back to normal, and it's what was semi-permanent has stayed semi-permanent.
We've been working on a consulting project in this space around how companies can think about office space, and a lot of that has to do with reducing commute times as well as saving money, I guess, on office costs. One of the big things in all of China is that even second tier cities have 8 to 10 subway lines, right? It's the thing about the country that I think is most impressive and they've done the best on is their public transportation
network. Love it.
And so, working from home or changing the office dynamic, there's a lot more optionality there because, you don't have to go all the way to, there isn't a single downtown. There's reasonable office space all over as long as you're connected to a subway station. And so the thesis that we have is that, companies will want to save money. And so right now, let's just be clear. I think most people are back in the office. 90% back because there is no active virus in the country, or very, very little of it. China obviously deserves a lot of credit for how they've managed to control the outbreak after it started. Obviously when it started, that's a more complicated issue. But a couple months in, they followed, I think, the playbook that other people should be following. And so people are back at work now. Having said that, there was a large work from home period here. Like everybody who had kids here, they didn't really go back to school last year, so we all experienced that as well. And so everybody is getting more familiar with, how do you do these things? I think a lot of companies will want to reduce office costs, to be frank. Office leasing expenses is the second biggest cost for most companies. And so if all of a sudden that's an option that they can reduce their costs 50% and employees are happier, I do think that will be a trend, although probably to a lesser degree than it will end up being in the West. As far as living, having more space, there isn't a lot of great options, unfortunately, Todd. Things are just so expensive everywhere here. I think people would like more space, but it's already, I think a lot of people are already stretched pretty thin here overall. I think there's some cool stuff going on with the third space ideas, and there's a startup here. You probably know him, Dominic Penaloza. So he used to be the head of innovation at WeWork. So he's WeWork China, and he's now doing partnering with some kind of mall operators on putting office spaces in malls that are essentially phone booths that people kind of use like the Mobikes. And so, there's different solutions that are being tried here, and then who knows what the answer is going to be. Yeah,
Dominic's been a pretty fantastic entrepreneur. He kind of created Youshi.com or Youshi.cn, which was a competitor to LinkedIn over in China before LinkedIn kind of limped into China. And then he was doing multiple startups. He went over to be a part of Naked Hub, and then when Naked Hub was acquired by WeWork, he went over to be the CIO over at WeWork. And I'm saying all of this because we are hunting Dominic, and we want to get him on the show as well, and hopefully we can get him soon now that all the WeWork rhetoric has kind of calmed down, and he can talk a little bit more freely. Let's talk to you about your startup though, PropertyFastBook. Tell us what is PropertyFastBook? What are you guys doing? What is your mission with PropertyFastBook? And full disclosure, I already know all the answers because you were a part of China Accelerator back when I was the program director and whatnot, but please do tell for our audience.
Absolutely. So when we started PropertyFastBook, the mission was to essentially help normal people invest into cross-border real estate, especially people that live in markets that are too expensive to really invest in, basically any major city in the world. A lot of people are just priced out. And so what our kind of view was that you could use data and data analytics to help analyze, and we focused on new construction residential, to analyze the new construction residential projects in different cities and rank them to just kind of help act as a filtering engine for people to kind of do their own research or to work with people from our team. And so we've been doing it for a few years. We've had some success. We raised a little bit of capital. Where we're at in 2020 and as we go into 2021, the area that we had the most traction was actually in Southeast Asia, and specifically around vacation real estate. And so that's likely the direction we're going to be taking the business, which is focusing on Southeast Asia vacation real estate for people that live in Asia Pacific. And and so that's kind of that's kind of a little pivot we're working on. Most of the people who buy vacation real estate now with the whole Airbnb ecosystem, it's still an investment. They may use it a little bit, but it's still, I think, primarily an investment that they're hoping to generate some cash from.
What is it like running your startup, a globally focused startup? What is it like to be running that out of Shanghai? Pros and cons.
Pros, I mean, the pros of just living in Shanghai in general, and I think you'll probably speak to this as well. You kind of feel like you have a pulse on the direction the world is going. And even today, I mean, this is obviously going to probably be the craziest, most stressful year of most people's lives. And China, the conflict between China and I don't know if it's conflict between China and the United States, but China and Donald Trump. That conflict is obviously is a part of this, probably as the secondary issue, after coronavirus. And it's interesting kind of being here and having a pulse on things and seeing what people are doing. And it's hard not to remain optimistic about China's economic future. Let's kind of put it mildly. And so in many ways, I don't know, you can kind of see the future a little bit. And I've always kind of felt like that living here, although, living in China, I don't think is the easiest thing to do. There's language complexities. Shanghai, I liked living in Shanghai. I've been here a while. My wife is Shanghainese, but it's not the easiest place for foreigners to come and kind of set up a life for a whole bunch of different reasons. But it certainly, I think, gives you a good perspective on where the world is going.
For sure. And you're right. I will comment to that. I think it's amazing. I have never felt more aware and felt like I understood better the way a lot of different areas of the world think, how they think and feel, than when I was living in Shanghai. Because Shanghai, and maybe you can comment to this a little bit, I felt like Shanghai was almost an island of just pure metropolitan, cosmopolitan diversity from every area of the world, all living there. It happened to be owned and operated by the Chinese, but I don't know if it was necessarily Chinese. Like, if you want to experience China, I don't recommend Shanghai to be the city you go and live in, because I don't think that's truly experiencing China.
You'll get a big misperception of what China actually is. You
will. But if you really want to go to one place that, to me, is probably one of the most multicultural places in the world, and you want to hang out and get to know people from all different areas of the world who are generally kind of smart, swashbuckling, curious, entrepreneurial types anyway, who have, leapt over borders and oceans to be there, it's amazing for that. I have felt that my understanding and knowledge of places in Europe or Africa or similar has kind of slipped away a little bit as I've left, because I just don't have the same kind of touch points and familiarity and congeniality with people from all the other areas in the world that I used to have while I was there. And I felt just that's something that I really miss now that I'm not there.
Yeah, exactly. And that, when I think about my own kind of life plan, that's the thing I know I'm going to miss if I go somewhere else, because it is really a unique city where, honestly, it just keeps you sharp. And so in many ways, I think that's been the positives. I think, tactically speaking, running a business, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of talent here now. I mean, a lot of people are bilingual if you're in a business that targets China as well as overseas. The technical talent here is pretty good. It's a little bit more expensive than certainly other places. Although if you go to kind of some second tier cities in China, the costs go down a lot. I don't know if you necessarily want to live in those cities. If you're a foreigner, they're not going to be this cosmopolitan, interesting experience. They're going to be kind of a rather drab experience. Well, one of the things that's interesting on that is kind of Chinese people in their 20s who want to go have an experience. I mean, Shanghai is really the only option for them. Mm-hmm. Shenzhen, there's stuff happening in Shenzhen. Beijing has some merits, but I mean, the other cities in China really lack personality, and I think that's not an overstatement. Like, they really lack personality, and people who want to experience something in their life, young Chinese people, I mean, this is really the main option for them to do that.
How has, if at all, the last year, with regards to COVID and no travel and then travel and markets, I mean, how has this affected Property Passbook?
We had a great January, and then we started. I was supposed to go to Hong Kong, I think January 27th with my family. And I'm on Twitter, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on actually, as the stories come out of Wuhan. And I actually went down to Thailand with my family for about a month and a half, while we were watching things play out. Yeah, so from a business perspective, I mean, we were already looking to Southeast Asia. Obviously, not a lot of international travel is happening this year, so not great for our business. But I think in many ways, and I think a lot of other entrepreneurs or even any business owners will speak of this. I think there was a lot of come to Jesus moments this year for people where they kind of recognized, something was right or it wasn't right, or I need to fix these things, and so that was kind of our story. I mean, we're still in business. I mean, I set up an office in Thailand this year, virtually. Speaking of running businesses virtually, I have hired 6 or 7 people there, and so we're all just kind of doing what we need to do. We're excited about the developments in the vaccines. I think travel is going to bounce back in ways that people can't imagine. Once people, I think there's a lot of pent up. I don't know what the right word is, but pent up. Like we see it because we see all the people inquiring from all over the world wanting to travel to Thailand all the time, and people are just getting restless at home, and so it could be like the 1920s, where people are just, after this is over, that everyone's just going to enjoy their life much more fuller than they did before.
Cabin fever, man.
Cabin fever. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, everybody is just like, I need to get out. I need to go. Like, I've got a place, up at Silver Star reserved for over the holidays. It's 20 minutes from my house, and you have no idea how much I'm looking forward to going and staying in somebody else's house for 20 minutes away, up at the ski hill. And that's about as good as we've got over here. So you're right. You're absolutely right.
Well, the thing is, although it's under control in China and it's under control in, let's say, Thailand and some other places, I can't leave the country though right now, right?
Not if you want to come back in.
Not if you want to come back in. So as a foreigner, this is really not convenient, right? Where it's like,
no,
when am I going to be able to see my parents again? When am I going to be travel abroad again? And so
quarantine sounds awful for the people that I know that have gone through it. We just released an episode with the CEO of WPIC Marketing Technologies, Jacob Cook. And I know he had to go through the 14 days. Our friend Richard Robinson just came back in. A lot of people have had to go through and do it. And wow, that just sounds not enjoyable whatsoever. Just not something I want to go through. But a lot of people still need to do it. So kudos to them and best of luck. How last question here. I mean, I want to go back to the overall topic here and talk a little bit about real estate planning, especially from a construction point of view. I mentioned early on about, wanting to be in the crane business when we get there, but has anything about COVID and the pandemic life that we all live in now, has it changed the way real estate planning is being done? Because you hinted towards a little bit about what Dominic is doing with almost putting these kind of mobile type of little office, little the telephone booths of people to be able to work in malls and things like that. I mean, we're having to almost reimagine a lot of current real estate infrastructure into what it could be, and how it can be reintegrated back into a new style of social and professional living. And then where does this leave construction, and where does this leave construction investment financing vehicles? Can you close us out a little bit, just kind of looking at, the construction, the investment, the planning, the financial vehicles. Are mega cities even still a thing? Let's close it out with that.
So, I mean, I personally think that people still want to live in, people still want to interact with cities. I don't think there's going to be, I think work from home is going to be something that's going to be real. And I think it's a positive thing. People won't feel as pressured to, I guess, live in cities, certainly, especially with families and whatnot. I mean, when you're young and single, that's one thing. But, as you get older and you need more space and you want to have children, you want to be able to kind of live a certain lifestyle. So in many ways, that might be a positive that comes out of this, that it's easier for people to do family planning because it's more acceptable to not have to commute every day. Just specifically about construction changes in the different asset classes of real estate. The one sector that continues to get lots of investment is logistics. So obviously online sales are booming. So I mean that's just another nail in the coffin of retail real estate, which has been playing out for 7 to 8 years already. Office spaces, I do think that buildings are going to have better health systems, I guess, to track things like to give people confidence, I guess, that viruses are not active in the building systems. I also think that there's going to be some changes in probably the size of office buildings. There's obviously less incentive to build super towers now, given that I don't think people are going to pay the same premiums they once did. For residential in China, I don't think there's going to be a lot of change in residential, because the positive of not having central building systems is you don't have central building systems when there's an active virus. So in many ways, these concrete, I actually think it's one of the reasons why coronavirus didn't spread as quickly across Asia, because this is the way apartment buildings are built here. Is there's not a central building system, so everybody's kind of in their own concrete box, and that's good when there's a pandemic going on. So I think a lot of the changes are going to, if anything, just accelerate trends that were already existing, as in China anyways.
Colin Bogar, thank you very, very much, buddy, for coming on the show and talking to us a lot about real estate sector, where we came from, what it's like in China, and all the insights that you had with regards to all your time there. Really appreciate it. And best of luck to you, your family, and to PropertyFastBook going forward.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co, and be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。